Hi guys, today we're going to do a nested if function, meaning if function within an if function, okay? And I've set up an example that I've come across before that I think is a really good one for starting out understanding when you would need to use such a function, such a nested function, and also how to do it. And it's also not too complicated so as to turn you off to pursuing further levels of complication. Okay, so here we have a bunch of flights. These are just the flight numbers I made up. These are the total number of seats on each one of these flights, and there's either 210 seats, 350 seats, 150, or 190. So I just went off the presumption that there's 4 types of aircraft, and these are the 4 capacities. Okay, here are the seats sold. So as we know, sometimes airlines oversell seats, and they have all different kinds of ways of dealing with things like that. But here we're going on the assumption that they can oversell a flight, and obviously they can undersell a flight. Like in this case, they sold less seats than the number of seats on the plane. And also they can fully book a flight, which is a case like this where there's 210 seats and there was also 210 seats sold. Okay, and basically what we want in this column is the status of the flight. So and here I just put a little note on the side here, and these are the 3 statuses or stati that we'll consider. The flight is full, the flight is overbooked, meaning we sold more seats than there is. There's space available, and space available would be like the first example here. There is 210 seats and we only sold 195. Okay, so there's 3 possibilities for each one of these flights. And as we know, because if you're new to if functions, maybe you should go and watch my earlier if function tutorial on my channel as a primer for this. But as we know, an if function has 3 parts. One is the test, and the second and third part are the values returned if the test is true and if the test is false. So it could give you back 2 things, right? Either or. Whereas here we have 3 possibilities. So here you're going to use nested if functions. Okay, so let's get started. Since we're all pretty familiar with if functions, we know we start with equals if, and then the first argument is the logical test. So arbitrarily I'm going to choose to make the first test whether the flight is full. So treating each row independently, let's deal with row 1. How can we test whether the flight is full? Basically that means if cell B3 equals cell C3, right? Because if they're equal, then the flight is full. So that's the first test, comma. What do we want Excel to return if the flight is full? Or in other words, if this first test is true? Well, obviously we want it to return, in quotes, flight full, right? Comma. What do we want Excel to return if B3 does not equal C3, or in other words, if this test fails? And what we want it to return if this test fails is either of 2 things. Either it's overbooked or there's space available. So we can't just write overbooked here because there's also the possibility that there's space available. So this is where a nested if function will come in. So basically what's going on here is if this test is true, then Excel will return flight full and we're done. Comma, if this test is false, we will continue with another if function, another test. So we type if here. So it'll only get this far to the second if this test fails. Because if it's true, we end with flight full and Excel doesn't continue any further on this function. Okay? So now, if this test fails, now what's another thing we want to test? Obviously, let's just take it in the next order. We want to test if it's overbooked. And how do we test if this flight is overbooked? We can see if the total seats is less than the seats sold. Because if the total seats is less than the seats sold, then we've overbooked the flight, right? And if this is true, of course, this will be overbooked, right? And then if we think about it, there's only one other possibility, and that is that space is available. And space is available will occur when total seats is greater than the seats sold. But we don't have to test that because by default, that's the only thing left. In other words, if this test fails and they're not full, then Excel will go to this test. And if this test fails, then it's not overbooked, then there's only one other thing it can be. And there we can just type space available in quotes. And we'd close the parentheses on the nested if function, and then close the parentheses on the larger if function that's containing this nested if function, okay? And remember, the open parentheses have to equal the closed parentheses, and this becomes something that gets quite annoying when you have 5 or 6 if functions nested within each other. But over here it's clear, there's 2 open and 2 closed, okay? So let's just review this function again before we hit enter. So this is what's going on. First, the if function is testing whether B3 equals C3. If they equal each other, then the flight is full, and we're done. Excel will stop right there and chop it off right there. But if B3 doesn't equal C3, then Excel will continue, and it will go into another if function. And this time it will test if B3 is less than C3. And that would mean that the flight is overbooked. And it'll return overbooked, and it would finish there if that was the case. But if this fails and this fails, then there's only one thing left, and that is the final status, which is space available. Now we hit enter, and in this first case, before we hit enter, I always like to take a little guess at what it's going to be, and obviously in this case there's going to be space available. So let's see if it returns the right thing, and voila, it does. And just like all functions, if it's done correctly, we can drag it down. Let's drag this all the way down and go through a couple rows to see that it worked properly. Okay, the second row, there's 210 seats, and we sold more seats than we had, so it's overbooked. Makes sense. Third flight, there's 350 seats, and we sold 312, so there's space available. Fourth, there's 150 seats, and we sold too many, so we overbooked. Flight 140 here, we sold there were 210 seats, and we sold exactly 210, so the flight is full. And so on all the way on down to flight 347, there's 150 seats available, and we only sold 112, so there's space available. Okay, so I hope this was a good introduction to nested if functions. Here we have 2 if functions, one within the other, and I hope it was a good illustration of when this would be useful, why you would use it, and also the logic of building it. I would take my time to build the function slowly and do it right once, check that it's correct, and then the time that it saves by being able to copy it all the way on down all your rows will pay off if you do the first function with care. Okay, subscribe to my channel, check out my other Excel tutorial videos, comment, let me know if there's any other topics you want me to cover. I'd be happy to. And until next time, practice, 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 and have a great day.